Alright, hi everybody, my name is Jenna and this is the first episode of the Banned Book Club. I'm so happy that you guys are here listening, and I really hope that you guys enjoyed reading it and will enjoy following along with my thoughts. I hope to hear yours as well in the comments. You can message me, and yeah, let's get this conversation. So I guess before we really start, I'm going to, just to keep my hands busy, I'm going to be getting ready while I talk about this. It helps me a little bit have the conversation flow, but I don't want it to negate from the fact that we're going to be talking about really heavy things such as sex trafficking, child exploitation, intense poverty, HIV, different things like that. So yeah, I guess with all of that said, let's jump into it. So Sold tells the story of a 13-year-old girl named Lakshmi who was sold into the sex trade by her father or stepfather. She lives in a very rural area of Nepal, and in that area her family doesn't have a roof. They make references in the beginning chapters that children die every year from illness, lack of access to medicine, healthcare, clean water. So the area that they're living in is in a pretty dire situation, I would say. Her family are struggling. She has a new baby sibling, and she and her mother are constantly scared of what will happen and trying to just kind of make ends meet. There's a lot of references in the beginning of the book about women's roles and women having to suffer in society. The strength of women is to endure. That's what the mother says, the Amma says. The strength of women is to endure. Something that really stood out to me in the beginning is that as soon as she started her period, her mother hid her away because that's the sign of womanhood. And she's not ready. Lakshmi isn't ready. Her mother isn't ready for what that reality will bring. So she's hidden away at the beginning, and after her period ends, she comes out. Unfortunately, she is still sold into the sex trade by her stepfather. So he comes home saying that there's an opportunity for her to go work as a maid in a big city in India, and she goes with him. And from that process, she is repeatedly sold to different parties, eventually ending up in a brothel in Calcutta in India, the red light district. She's forced into a brothel house, still not sure really what is going on, does not speak the language, and soon in that position she realizes that she's being sold into sex slavery. Because of what Mumtaz, the woman that owns the brothel, paid for her, she ends up in a perpetual situation of debt bondage, which, if anyone knows anything about debt bondage, it's virtually impossible to get out of it. There are lots of strategic attempts and efforts that the brothel owners, the people around, know and do to keep the victims engaged and stuck in these positions, whether it's sex trafficking, criminal exploitation, labor trafficking. And a lot of that does come through immigration, because she went across the border. They had to pay for her multiple times. So she's not only in a position where she's in a place she doesn't understand the language, she's also in a situation that's virtually impossible to get out of at whatever age you are. And her idea is that she wants to keep earning money. Once she accepts the situation, she wants to keep earning money by working in this brothel, and hopefully she can go home, buy her family a roof. There's a village boy that she's sort of has a crush on, and she's hoping that she'll be able to go back. The more time that she spends there, that reality diminishes as she sees the experiences other women are going through within the brothels. I was going to jump right into this kind of next part as why this book has been challenged, and there have been many attempts to ban it. In the United States, this is a theme right now with books that have to do with migration, critical race theory, LGBTQ rights, women's healthcare. There's constant pressure to remove these from the shelves, specifically in red states. So Sold was challenged in Pennsylvania by a parent because it had sexual content. Sorry, don't mean to laugh too early on. Also in Pennsylvania, was pushed by two moms from the Moms for Liberty, which is a very alt-right group that is political and advocates against school curriculum that includes the topics I had mentioned before. Florida, it was challenged by local moms from Liberty Readers, which is the same kind of entity as Moms for Liberty in Pennsylvania. And also in Virginia. Alabama, it was challenged at public libraries, which caused a big uproar just because it's a public library. Who's funding it? Who's making these determinations? Library funds come from community funds in local areas and also state funds. So it kind of comes to the discussion, who has the right to determine that? I'm not going to be commenting on that at this time. I think probably if you follow me, you know my opinion is that books should never be banned. That's censorship. I don't agree that this book is displaying sexual content. I think it's traumatic content, it's real content, and it's stories that need to be understood. Said it's being challenged for depictions of sexual content, human trafficking. Young readers are not able to fully understand what's happening, and there's emotional intensity as well. I can't deny that it's an emotional book. There were times I was reading it and I just went like this even while reading it. I have experience in the human trafficking sector, not lived experience obviously, but working in that space. I've heard a lot of stories. I find it awful and disgusting in each context, but hearing it especially from the perspective of a child that doesn't understand what's happening adds another layer of intensity to it. Objections were tied to the book's broader content. There weren't necessarily individual I'm forgetting my makeup. There weren't necessarily individual passages in it that would have contributed. The objections were tied to the whole book's theme. There weren't specific passages in it that were referenced in the ban. It's just that it references trafficking, children being forced to have sex, and parents were concerned. I guess the implied sexual assault can be considered very, very heavy for young readers, especially in the ages 12, 13. Maybe they don't understand those dynamics yet, but I would argue that a lot of them might, and hearing it named could present an opportunity for people to understand maybe their own experiences more, also to understand the experiences of people outside of their own, especially in countries where maybe people will never go to Nepal or India or Calcutta, and they'll never see these things. And as a world, we need to understand the perspectives to bring together the community. It's a lot about life in a brothel. So it talks about the women there, the children there. There's a very, very dark part where the brothel owner attempts to blackmail one of the sick women into selling her baby into sex slavery, saying in a couple years men will pay a high price for it, forcing the women to hysterically leave the brothel, no other options. There's also the added dynamic of women that are sex workers are not going to be traditionally welcomed back into society. The woman, Monica, she pays her debt. She goes back home only to find out that they've all told her child that she was dead and that she's not welcome back because of this shame that she would bring. The book also discusses loss of innocence. So as she kind of transitions, you see how she comes to accept her reality, how she comes to understand what's happened. And, you know, she tries as hard as she can to kind of cope with it and accept it. At times she doesn't, and she flees and she hides in her room until she's forced to come out. And then there's times in the book where it describes how she processes it by pretending it's not happening to her, disassociating, turning her brain off, things that are commonly experienced and used as coping methods by those who have been or are being sexually assaulted. So it is a very, very common reality, even if you're not in this context. I think as well, the mention of HIV is very prevalent, how one of the women at the brothel comes down with HIV and she's left. They make her leave the brothel where she's given no recourse or finances, and being a shamed woman with the virus, as they call it, she has very little recourse to receive any type of retribution or support in that society. I think it's important to mention that trafficked girls and women are extremely vulnerable to sexually transmitted infections, diseases such as HIV, chlamydia, gonorrhea, many of them. Not only that, they also are not allowed proper health care to receive cures, medication, treatment for these diseases. So it prolongs it. It can create a worse situation, especially with things like HPV that can lead to cervical cancer. The emotional weight as well. These are very, very heavy topics again. HIV is a very heavy topic. I don't think a lot of children, even though I learned about sexually transmitted diseases when I was in 4th or 5th grade, and I still don't feel like I truly understood the weight of it, even though it's explained. While it's important to raise awareness, I think also there's the reality that some children may not really understand the gravity of what they're reading. That being said, this book is intended for young adults and high school readers. As I mentioned, it's argued that these topics are too mature for young adults and high school readers. I disagree. I think it's appropriate exactly for those reasons, because it's very important that, as I said, youth understand the reality of that around the world. The book is not sexually explicit. It does not romanticize any of these experiences. I would be extremely surprised if any reader had found this book influential or having an influential effect to make, there's no way that this could make youth want to experience that, is kind of my perspective. They don't present sex in any type of sexy way. They don't even explicitly describe it except as painful, coercive, forceful, and a child having sex with adult men. While I can maybe understand that this book should be framed with a discussion to help young adults understand what they're reading, I disagree with the idea that they're not able to understand and it will have a negative implication on their future. I think it exposes real-world issues, it centers the victim's perspective, and it encourages empathy. It's not endorsing anything. So I think it's important that Sold is still read because it exposes, a global real issue. Human trafficking happens everywhere, but when there's vulnerabilities like poverty, lack of a language, migration, familial abuse, like with the stepfather, these conditions can amplify a victim's or a person's risk to become victimized by trafficking and traffickers. I think the book centers the victim's perspective. The author did an amazing job of going to India, doing research, working with NGOs, trying to continually center the victim's perspective. She's really great. She's done a lot of books along the same topic. She also wrote the young adult version of I Am Malala, and so I'd recommend looking into her work, but that's another story. I think that this book encourages empathy and not endorsement. Reading it as someone who knows, and also just as a human, I think it was extremely moving and powerful to hear from a child's perspective, whether it's fictional, based on real events, hearing about how she coped with this, how she eventually got out, and the juxtaposition of that men were the ones that were victimizing her, but at the end, the men were the only ones that were empowered and had the community power to do something about it when she's liberated by the Americans at the end. I think it's a very complex dynamic and shows the inequity in society as well, that the women were stuck, even when people came, they would hide in the closet to hide from the police, from rescuers, because they were so scared to leave the brothel. I think this book is actually written very responsibly. There was not very many depictions or descriptions of sex. At all. It was always rape, but I also think that nothing was so graphic that would make a child consider it in that type of way. It's all described very painfully, very forcefully, and very aggressively, and it's disturbing, to be honest. I think that this book is also important because it kind of recognizes that critical thinking perspective. So it discusses complex moral issues. It discusses poverty as a pipeline for being victimized. And I think that's something that happens everywhere in the world, but especially in the United States. You don't see that intense level of poverty. Poverty looks different everywhere. But most people in the United States, there are some that are in extreme poverty. I will never deny this, but it is not the norm to not have a roof. It is not the norm to have to trade your earrings for a bottle of Coke. It is not the norm to sell your daughter to a brothel owner. These are not the most typical experiences that people will have in the US. I like to say as well, it's not the typical experience of someone that lives in India or Nepal. However, it is more common because of the socioeconomic dynamics there. I think as well that this book is really important for young adults to read because it centers human rights from a global perspective, social justice, social injustices as well, and the global inequality that exists because of what I have just mentioned. The next point I want to bring up is that avoiding difficult stories kind of limits that critical thinking ability. So in a time when the government, other people, they're trying to, change the perspective despite what we're seeing with our own eyes, it's important to keep our eyes and our ears open to what the real lived experiences are. Shielding youth, shielding students will only create a society that's more ignorant, that's less understanding, and especially right now with immigration, racism, xenophobia that's happening, it creates us and them. In reality, we're all just one people, and we have to support each other. And I think that this book does a really, really good job of engaging in difficult content. So for all of those reasons, I do not support the ban. I mean, as I mentioned, I don't support any ban, but my aim with bringing this channel, this topic, this series kind of to life is that I really want to have these nuanced discussions, because maybe someone will disagree with me and I want to hear that perspective. I want to hear why people are concerned about maybe their kids reading these books. I want to hear about why they're concerned about having them in the school. I'll probably disagree, but I think that that's a valid perspective and we have to think about it critically. I don't have kids. I'm not a child psychologist. I'm just a person that's passionate about books, reading, human rights, non-censorship, and understanding and hopefully creating a world that's liberated and free from exploitative, racist, xenophobic, hateful practices. So if you guys have a different perspective, I really encourage you guys to share it with me. I'd love to hear as well if you agree with me. That's great. Thank you guys so much for watching this and tuning into the first episode of the Banned Book Club. I really, really enjoyed, I hate saying enjoyed, I really found this book compelling. I found it very shocking, and also I found it very inspiring. You hear the experiences that some people are going through, and it just really puts everything into perspective. So I hope you guys found it in that same way. The book next month is going to be To Kill a Mockingbird. I'm really happy I have this book in person. Sold, I had to read on my Kindle because of, I move around a lot. But I will be sharing my discussions, my opinions on and why this book is considered banned and challenged in many areas and states. So yeah, thanks again for tuning in, and we have to read like our freedom depends on it. So I hope everyone is continuing to do so, continuing to engage, checking out my reading list and the honorable mentions, and I hope to see you next time. Ciao!